So again, welcome everybody. Good afternoon to those on the East Coast. Good morning to colleagues joining us in the West. My name is Ryan Kingsbury. I'm an assistant professor here at Princeton University. And it's my honor today to host the second installment in our AESP Standing on the Shoulders of Giants conversation series. We are very fortunate today to have as our guest Dr. Sharon Walker. Sharon is really a leader in higher education who has devoted a lot of her career towards professional development and leadership in higher education. She is currently a distinguished university professor of environmental engineering and dean emerita from Drexel University. She has worked as the executive director of an organization called AEESP, which is a leadership program for senior faculty. She's led 3 NSF advanced grants that focus on professional development, pay equity, and policy justice. And most recently, served as I mentioned, she's Dean Emerita, so was the Dean of the College of Engineering at Drexel University. Prior to that, she was a faculty member at UC Riverside, where she also served as interim dean of the College of Engineering. And her research career has focused on how pathogens and nanomaterials behave in natural and engineered systems. Sharon has embraced a number of other leadership roles, such as the chair of the Dean's Council, the board of directors of AESEE, and even the board of AESP, our parent organization. So we are really delighted to have Sharon with us today. Sharon, welcome. Thank you for participating in this.
Thank you so much. I have to hit the unmute button. I apologize. A little slow. I am just so happy to be here and grateful to see familiar faces and names on the screen, and also some I don't know. So I'm really excited to grow my community in AESP as well today.
Fantastic. So what we're going to do today is go through a series of questions that we've prepared as a community of practice, and hear your little bit about your professional journey, your perspective on the field. And then we're hoping that we'll be able to get through those, and we'll have a few minutes toward the end of the conversation for questions from the audience. So stay tuned for those.
Sounds good.
So let's begin kind of with a big picture question. So could you just share a little bit about your academic journey with us, and particularly if there were particular motivations or kind of pivotal moments that helped shape the career journey that you've taken?
Sure. I love this question. I like to think of in life a series of stepping stones, some of them as we cross the proverbial stream. We choose intentionally, and others we just have to choose because that's the next best step for us. And so I have a few interesting stepping stones that I think are part of my journey, if you allow me to share. The first is I actually came to environmental engineering in an indirect route. I was actually originally trained as a classical guitarist and thought that I would be a musician. And I learned to play when I was 4. I actually learned to read music before I could read letters. And so that really was my passion, except I also was very athletic. And so in a wild game of ultimate frisbee, when I was 17, a disc got knocked out of my hand and it tore all the ligaments in my finger. And just overnight, my guitar career essentially ended because it took a couple years to regain the strength and the mobility of my hand. And so that summer, my mom, of all things, saw at a library this little sign that said, "Introduce your child to engineering." And it was this wonderful outreach program at New Mexico Tech, which is a fabulous regional public university in New Mexico, that had a program where high school kids would come and do experiential learning, field trips, and so on to learn about all the kinds of engineering there was. So there I was, a kid from LA, going to the middle of nowhere, New Mexico, to a beautiful place and taking field trips. And it was while I was taking a tour of a wastewater treatment plant on the catwalk, back when they used to let you walk on the catwalks above the reactors, right? It was over a clarifier that I thought, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. Just the idea that we could design tools to essentially clean up the environment, right? My 17, 18-year-old self had a simplistic view, but the idea that we could understand nature and use it as a way to replenish water. And growing up in Southern California, where I grew up with just droughts as the norm, I was just fascinated with water treatment, wastewater treatment, and water reuse. So I went back after that and changed my major in college and went through as an environmental engineer. So here we are. It was a fateful Frisbee accident that got me here. So that's sort of my first stepping stone. But I will say a very important part of that was a wonderful professor named Bill Chavez. To this day, I send him updates every few years about what I'm up to. He's an emeritus faculty. He was the one who ran this program for high school students, and he changed my life. And so the moment I became a professor, I got very involved in outreach to community college students because I realized just as he had made opportunity available to me, I really believe that we always need to do for others that may not know about engineering, know about the opportunities, or have access. So that was my first one from guitar. The next was when I was an undergraduate at USC, I spent a semester on Catalina Island, which is a desert island off the coast of Los Angeles. And it was so much fun taking classes in the field. It was because I was a double major with environmental engineering and environmental science. And I was doing a project looking at the flushing rate of a harbor. And it involved going out there with the days before a lot of satellite imagery and remote sensing. I was out there with friends with boats and a bunch of flow meters as we tried to do samples. And it was an El Nino year, and it rained every day, and it was cold, and it was windy. And ultimately, in the end, the data was pretty lousy because all of those external factors made it not the least bit representative. So I learned a very important lesson, which was field work is hard. And for any of you that conduct field work, I deeply respect it. I appreciate how hard it is. I also realized that going on into my PhD, I wanted lab work. I am a big fan of systematic, clean systems. So that was sort of a very important stepping stone, right? It got me into environmental engineering. I was going on to graduate school, and I knew I wanted to do lab-based studies. And then probably the most important stepping stone was I landed at Yale University, and I was part of the first recruited class into the environmental engineering program that Many Elimelech had started there. And I think that's, you all know because you made it through, but we all have had that person, that mentor. And for me, Many was that person who helped me really become a really good researcher and helped me develop my curiosity and my work ethic and my focus. I admit my straight out of college self was not perhaps the most focused graduate student at first. But Many was such a great mentor, and he really helped me develop in a way that kept me curious for many years to come. So that was a big piece. And I was very lucky that I got my first faculty job at UC Riverside. And UCR, it's now an AAU institution, but when I got there, it was a relatively new engineering college. It was hungry for that kind of national recognition. And I was surrounded by very hardworking, equally motivated people. And that made a huge difference in my early career. I was able to get up to speed because it's sort of like if you're a runner, you sort of pace yourself. And you find yourself sometimes going faster if you're running with people that are a little faster than maybe your normal comfort level would be. And I learned a very important lesson of needing to keep myself surrounded by equally curious and motivated people. Because when I do that, I stay motivated and I stay productive, even if there are other types of forces out there. And then
Great insight.
yeah, I appreciate it. And then just I'll wrap this one up, but I'll just say I made it into leadership, and we can talk about this later if you're interested, how I made that transition. But when I came to Drexel in 2018, I expected to continue my research program, but then COVID hit. And it forced me to transition my focus to, I couldn't really balance both. And my college, my faculty, my staff, my students needed my undivided attention. And so during that period, my last two students graduated, my last postdoc moved on to a different role. And so that sort of ended my more formal lab and research career, which I still mourn that identity a bit. However, I do think I've found ways to contribute that in the long run are going to be valuable and impactful. And so that's sort of been my academic journey, not as traditional as Many, but those are key highlights I think that are relevant.
Oh, that's amazing to hear. I mean, there's certainly a recurring theme of adaptation from adapting to your Frisbee accident and changing your career plans all the way to adapting to leadership and having to kind of step away from the lab side of things. Thank you. And that's actually a perfect segue into our next question. I'm going to put the slides up for just a moment. So our next question is kind of about balancing all the demands on you, and specifically, as you've progressed through this career journey you've described for us, um, how have the demands and your responsibilities, both in work and life, changed, particularly in your case, in that transition into senior leadership? Um, yeah, how has that changed, and what kinds of other adaptations has that required?
Well, I think being flexible and being open to change is a big part of all of this, because what I needed to do to achieve some level of balance has changed with my different life phases and stages. I guess I tend to like to think of it more as finding equilibrium in life as opposed to a balance, right? There's going to be times that there's lots more reactance that you're going one way, and there are other times you can kind of like relax back into steady state a little bit. I know I'm mixing my analogies here, but you get the point that it's not that you really ever achieve balance. It's just trying to find equilibrium and knowing sometimes you're out of equilibrium, and that's okay too, as long as you're working back towards it. When I started my career, I was still single, and I had a lot of flexibility, and that made it honestly a lot easier. Could work weird hours and crazy times, but I also, in hindsight, realized I was incredibly inefficient. And it was nothing like finding my life partner and starting our family that taught me how to use my time most effectively. In fact, I think my best period of research achievement and productivity and student graduation was in the period of time when I started having kids. Because for the first
Wow.
time, I started really thinking very carefully about when and how I would do what. For example, I learned very quickly that my brain functions the best in the morning. From about 8 a.m. to 11 a.m., that's like the magic time. Partially, it's when my tea starts to sort of set in and I've got a little caffeine in the system. And I quickly learned that was the time to always protect for my science, for my students, for working on that proposal, editing that paper, whatever it was around my research program. And then all of those other things, the committee meetings, the office hours, even before I got into leadership, really keeping those in the time of day where it's not like I'm not functional in the afternoon, but I definitely, it's a declining capacity. So I would use the afternoons for that period of time. And that's, once I discovered that, it was amazing. We can say there's only 24 hours in the day, but if you really look at it, a lot of us don't use those hours we use as effectively as we can. So just some rearranging on how I use my time had a big part of it. And that actually allowed me to get into leadership more, because as long as I relegated more admin roles to the afternoon, I was able to stay research active even through being an associate dean and then an interim dean for a number of years. And that was just because of how I did time management and really protected my time. But I think kids, more than anything, force me to achieve work balance. And for others, it might be fur pets, like dogs and cats or whatever it is that is your distraction and love. I think that's just has been really important for me. I have 4 kids. I had one the month I got tenure, one when I became an associate professor. They all link to different, one when I became a dean. So they all link to different transitions in my career too. I think I had an extra one there and as an associate professor period. I think that was really important because I stayed focused on who I was beyond my research identity and my professorial identity. And I really enjoy that. Now, I admit, when I got into leadership more formally as a dean, and between UCR and Drexel, I was a dean. I'm no longer now. I'm back to faculty, but I was a dean for 8.5 years, almost 9 years. And that made it harder to separate. I always protected my time, but it was harder to compartmentalize the sort of intellectual piece, maybe the emotional piece, but the intellectual. My brain was always thinking about how I might solve some issue going on at the university. And to some degree, I didn't realize how much that had sort of consumed me until I stepped back, then was on sabbatical, now back to the faculty, because I definitely feel this sort of mental energy return where I'm not constantly in my subconscious trying to problem solve some issue. Now that said, when I was dean, I was still very present. I've been a Girl Scout leader the whole time I've been a dean. I've been a cookie mom. I drive my kids to all their sports. So the balance is achieved. But I think for each of you, you just got to figure out what's the right balance and just know what that looks like. And each stage is just going to be different. So I think that the other piece I'll just say is just to give yourself the grace and forgive yourself if you're not doing everything well. I heard one person once say, today I was a really great mom and a really bad professor. And tomorrow I might be a really great professor and a really bad mom. But again, it gets back to that equilibrium. We just do the best we can and be kind to ourselves as we do it.
That's very reassuring to hear as the parent of a almost 2-year-old that you found those constraints to ultimately be a net positive that could propel focus and everything. That's great. Well, and again, you've made a beautiful segue because I guess the next question that we want to talk about is about balance, maybe less about the work and the life piece, but about all the different pieces of your professional life or our professional lives as scholars. So I think everyone on the call, I'm sure, is aware that faculty life involves this balance between teaching and research and service, as well as leadership, which is maybe we could carve out an important subcategory of service there. But yeah, say a little bit more, if you would, about your approach to managing those three pieces in relation to each other.
So I really believe service is actually the most important of those three. Because if you remember that we're professors to serve our students and to serve the generation, our community through generation of knowledge, then the others come along with it, the research and the teaching. And so I'm of the belief that we cannot value service enough. The trick is to make sure the service is a means to an end and actually is using your energy and your talent most effectively. I really believe it's important. I once had a mentor at UC Riverside, a wonderful woman named Linda Walling, who is the associate dean in the Natural and Agricultural College, Natural and Agricultural Sciences College. And she always said that when you choose your service, choose one, what you're passionate about, and two, make sure all your service has that kind of alignment, right? You don't want to be on this undergraduate curriculum committee and this grad admissions committee and then a search committee over here and then maybe on a campus redevelopment committee. I mean, sometimes you have to be on a variety, but if you're passionate about undergraduate education, stick to it. Make your service all about it. If you're really passionate about graduate students, stick to it and expand. Because what it does is it builds not only a track record, but a depth of understanding and expertise, such that every time you contribute in service, it's that much more meaningful. Plus, you develop enough expertise and track record that it allows you to then ultimately be prepared for and eligible for titled compensated roles. That a lot of faculty do a lot of service that could, if more efficiently managed, turn into roles that get you accolades and even better, sometimes a nice stipend to support the work that you're doing as opposed to always in volunteerism. So figure out what you're passionate about. For me, I got into leadership because I'm passionate about graduate students. Really cared about their well-being, partially because I had such a fabulous mentor myself in many when I was a graduate student. And I wanted to be a great grad advisor, and I also wanted to make sure graduate students loved their PhD experience like I did. And I became the grad advisor for my department. I wrote some GAN, and back then it was called a IGERT. Now it's an NRT from NSF. And I brought in these grants that allowed me to recruit a lot of students. And we not only increased the students, we diversified the students by every metric imaginable. And we increased, because of the great programming, we increased retention and time to degree. And the grad college noticed that. They're like, whoa, what's going on in chem and environmental engineering over there? And then found out it was activities I was doing. And I got asked to be an associate dean in the graduate school. So my first leadership role was actually following my passion that only came about because I was leaning into my passion for supporting grad students. And then I never expected to sort of make it to this administrative role, at least not that early in my career. So I just suggest figure out what you're passionate and the rest will follow. Again, mine was graduate students, so I leaned into that. I had really happy grad students. Happy grad students are productive graduate students. Happy graduate students beget more ideas and curiosity and innovation, and that makes it so much easier to come up with the really exciting new proposal ideas, right? Plus my service to AESP and being on the board, being active in that community, meeting wonderful people in environmental engineering also beyond my campus, then begat additional collaborations. And so I think the really important part is do what you're passionate about, and the rewards follow. Now, that said, this is me wearing a dean hat. Don't be foolish. Pay attention to your faculty handbook. Know what you need to do to get your tenure and get your promotion. You still have to do that. But within those constraints, there's ways to optimize to spend your time doing what you're most passionate about. And then the rest follow. And if you're passionate and happy, your teaching's that much better. Your it comes out in everything you do with your teaching, your mentoring, and your research.
Synergy.
Mm-hmm.
Find the synergies. Interesting. Well, great. Well, so next we want to get a little bit more granular and just ask what a typical day looks like. So our next question here is, describe a typical day for us, and maybe how is that typical day different during the academic semester versus during the summer or winter break? How do you manage your time? How are you able to stay focused? How do you manage your overall well-being?
So I have to admit, as if you couldn't pick this up, I'm a huge extrovert. So when I'm around people, even in this virtual sense, I'm happy. So I understand for some people who are more introverted, the way I might talk about spending my time might just overwhelm you. Just be like, how does she do that? But for me, my energy is around being people and bright, motivated people. So I guess I'm a parasite, really. But in that way, I just really love being around others. So when you ask me about how do I spend my days, I've always enjoyed being on campus as much as I can. Now I'm there less post my administrative roles. That's a whole nother conversation. But during my faculty career, I love being on campus. And now, of course, I was growing up as a faculty member pre-COVID. I know the world is different, but I want to encourage you all to be on campus as much as you can, because that's where the synergies happen. That's where the energy happens. And you never know what amazing just conversations and research will come out of just somebody popping their head into your office and saying, let's go for a coffee. One of my best collaborations came from a gal who's in plant pathology. We were studying bacterial transport for vectors for plant diseases. And that whole research program, we were collaborating and publishing for close to 10 years together, came out of just a faculty mixer on campus that turned into us meeting for a coffee. And the next thing you know, we became good friends and really great science came. And she was from plant pathology. So it's also about not just showing up in your department, it's about showing up on your campus. And I guess you guys appreciate, right? As environmental engineers, we're just inherently interdisciplinary. So we have to get out beyond our office, beyond our floor, beyond our hall, and get to know others. So when I was a faculty member, sort of the first round, I've been all along, but you understand, that's sort of the pre-leadership time, I would be on campus all day. And as I said, I learned quickly to spend my time mornings, focused work, afternoons, lots of meetings. I always kept my door open. I'm a big believer in that. I always would have a social lunch, force myself out of my office, even though I'm brown bag type. And then I'd try to, before kids, I'd get home, just basically go home when I was hungry for dinner. But once there were kids, I was, my day ended once it was time for them to be home from school. I'm actually really grateful with my kids. My workday now is 9 to 3. But I'm probably getting more done now in my 6-hour day than I was early on in my career in maybe a 10-hour day. Because I know they're going to get home from school and run into this room and be like, Mama, what's up? What's for snack, right? Who's driving me to practice, right? This is just my identity changes at 3 p.m. So I'll just say that was sort of the day, just being present, being open to possibility, and using the time wisely as much as I could. See, there you go, work-life balance. Hello, Mohan's little person. That's the best part of this whole hour together. Class of, 20, 30 something. Well, maybe a little later than that. But I'll just share that make the most of the flexibility too that our jobs give us. And I encourage you to take advantage of that. Now, actually, I'm back to the faculty. I've started my own consulting company. I'm actually doing executive coaching and consulting because one of the things that I loved as being a dean was helping faculty in their careers as they figured out what they wanted to do next. And sometimes it was a junior faculty trying to figure out, in a tough spot. Sometimes it's a senior person trying to figure out if they want to transition into leadership or something like that. And I love being able to mentor them. So I decided I didn't have to stop just because I don't have a title of dean. And now I've started my own company. And that's the joy of being an academic, right? Make the most of it. If you want to do a startup, if you want to do some consulting, we can. And I just encourage you to make the most of that flexibility because it brings a lot of joy.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. And what strikes me about your comments here about the value of, taking time for social lunches, going to faculty mixers and making the unexpected connections is it harkens back to our previous question. You have to not be so overwhelmed that you will make
You
time for
feel
those
you have
things.
that time.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's challenging for those of us who are junior faculty, but um, I guess it speaks back to synergy, as you were saying, and trying to keep everything in balance.
Mm-hmm. And if you're one of those people that it's really hard to be spontaneous, then schedule it.
Hmm.
Schedule time to walk down the hall and knock on a colleague's door until you find somebody to go for coffee.
Hmm.
I know that sounds silly, but if you're that introverted person who could just get caught up in your work and not leave your office all day, make it happen. I just assure you, as I sort of look back on my years as a faculty member and in leadership, what has been the most rewarding are the relationships and what comes out of the relationships when you find those sort of shared interests. So just definitely making time for that is always important. And it's perfectly fine to make time for that after you drop off your kids and before you pick them up. And people will respect you for setting those boundaries. And if they don't, you shouldn't be wasting your time with them anyway.
Yeah. Oh, very good. Thank you. Okay, so next, we want to get into a topic that I think we often avoid, which is that not everything goes as planned in our careers. So you've obviously
Mm-hmm.
achieved lots of success in your career, but I wonder if you could share something, a story, an effort that did not achieve its intended outcome or wasn't successful. Something that was rejected, a job you didn't get, or something like that. And what did you take from that? How did you take it and move forward?
Absolutely. I'm a big believer in sharing what didn't work. I remember there was one year at a Gordon conference I go to that we challenged everybody to share their null results as opposed to what did work. And I think that's really important that we take the time to focus on what we can learn when things don't work. Right? Learning from failure is probably one of the best lessons. We don't always teach it to our kids, so that's just another piece. When I was an assistant professor, I was a combination of proud and terrified, such that I was afraid to share early proposal drafts with anyone. I was so worried that somebody would see that I'm some sort of imposter, that my ideas weren't creative enough, fully developed, innovative enough. I was so nervous about it. So my first 6 months as an assistant professor at UC Riverside, in those first 6 months, I wrote 10 grants. And
Wow.
one of them actually got funded for $50,000, which was sort of symbolic, which I think was important that at least I felt that somebody cared. But my federal ones, that was just a local grant. My federal grants, all of them just got really mediocre scores. Now, the positive is back then, the panels used to give you a lot more feedback when you'd write a proposal. I feel like now they don't as much for a variety of reasons, but that's for another conversation. But I use the feedback from the panels to help me get better. And more importantly, I never try to write, almost 2 proposals a month again. Over the next few years, I got much more strategic about which ones to write for. I wouldn't write a proposal to submit unless I had gone and done a panel yet or with that program officer, or at least visited the program officer. I think it's a huge benefit to take the time to go to DC and get to know the people in person if you can, and your university will help you get there. And if they don't, call me and I can help you with some strategies for that. But getting to know the people that were funded by the program and the projects funded by the program, I started learning to do the homework so that my success rate started really going up. And I would be just more thoughtful about where I would spend my time. So choosing which I was going to go for, going to targeted conferences so I'd learn a little bit more, meet the right people, was so much better use of my time. But I'll tell you, that first year, getting 9 rejections, it was so hard. And it took me a while to feel comfortable. I mean, even one of my mentor in the department, who's about the sweetest human you can imagine, Mark Matsumoto, kept asking me, do you want me to read this for you? And I was terrified to let him read it, as if he would see that I was some sort of sham. Now, once I got over myself, he and others gave me great feedback. And in fact, I started a writing group with so the year I came in, there were no other environmental or chemical faculty that started, but there were a few mechanical. So I started this writing group with some mechanical engineering faculty, and we would just hold each other accountable. Like, how's your proposal coming? And do you want to, and we would read it because we were all smart engineers. So we could see if the experiments aligned to the aims or, or to the goals and just could help each other. So I learned a lot about starting early, being strategic, swallowing my pride a little bit, but also knowing that it's okay to be vulnerable and share share what early drafts are out there, and developing those trusted people who can give you feedback. And the feedback is not a personal reflection. It's just I've learned feedback is a gift. It may have taken me 20 years after I started my career to finally really truly believe it, but feedback is a gift. I'll just also share, it's not like being an assistant professor is the only time where we're worried about failure. It always continues, right? I learned sort of different times in my career that it's not always going to go to plan, right? I'm a big planner. I like to try to align things. You could probably pick that up when I talk about how I plan my time and my strategy and all that. But there's just some things out of your control. And a perfect case in point, I love being a dean, but I'm not a dean anymore because there was a change in university leadership and there was a restructuring out of my control. And so I'm back to faculty, which actually, don't get me wrong, I'm bringing a lot of excitement to coming back to a wonderful department. But, when you get to certain stages in your career, you're still just as vulnerable. We just may not share it as much, or you may not see it in the same way. But there's a lot of times there's things beyond our control, forces beyond our control. The last of my funding was terminated last May, right? So I went from being what one could say a successful professor. I had over 20 years of continuous federal funding. My last grant is gone. I don't have students. I lost my dean job. I mean, one could say this is like, this sucks, right? But the reality is we're a wonderful community, and it is a gift to be a professor, and I'm excited to be back and just finding the joy in those parts. But I share that because it happens to all of us at different stages, and so much of our career is a function of what we can't control. And so within what you can control, just find the joy in it.
Well, yeah, thank you for sharing. So, okay, let's move to our next topic here. Make sure I find the right window to share. All right, somewhat on a similar theme, but could you describe a particular pivotal experience, whether that might have been a research collaboration or a service experience, mentorship, that took you in an unexpected direction, led to an unexpected breakthrough or success story? And how did the lessons that you learned from that experience change what you did in the future?
So the pivotal experience that came to my mind with this question was actually, one, I can't give too many details because the community is too small. But my very first funded collaborative grant was with 2 co-PIs that were very notable, lovely people. But once we got the grant, the 2 of them just came to loggerheads. They started arguing about everything. When we were in the collaborative planning phase of the proposal, it was super exciting. But when you got into the meat of the project, they got really possessive and territorial. And it was such a painful 3 years of funding. Now, we got papers out of it. We had graduated students out of it. But it actually took a lot of the joy out of the science. and out of the whole project, because mostly I felt like a marriage counselor between these two. And because, one wouldn't share this unless the other shared that. And it was just like, come on. So this was a really important experience because I was so excited that these two senior people had asked me to be on a proposal with them that I just said yes and said yes to kind of everything. I learned from that experience the importance of how you choose your collaborators, and more importantly, how you set up an effective collaboration. So I liken collaboration to finding roommates, or maybe establishing norms with your partner. But let's go with the roommates analogy. You're going to have to enjoy being with them a lot, right? Sometimes it'll be when you're fresh and rested. Sometimes it's going to be when you're tired and cranky. You got to still enjoy their company. Number one. Number two, you have to talk about the chores. You have to know who's going to do the dishes. You're going to have to know who's going to replace the toilet paper, right? Those are conversations, if you don't have with your roommate, things fall apart and you get in an argument, right? It's the same thing with collaborators. I learned very early on in the proposal writing phase the need to talk through all of the details and not be afraid to say, okay, you'll be the lead on this with your students and we'll collaborate in this way. And so any papers out of this we'll presume will come out of your group leading, right? This is the one you would lead. This one is more of a synthesis. Let's wait and see how the data falls into place, but we'll use this rubric as we go. I mean, it's not like, I'm not talking about a really tight confinement. It's just setting the tone of openness to talk through what could happen in a project together and how you want to manage it. The other piece is, in that first proposal or project, I was the assistant professor. I was working with two full professors. And they insisted on constantly always being the corresponding author. Now, they had nothing to prove. That's silly. I should have pushed. I'm the one trying to get tenure. Make me corresponding author, right? So now, as a rule of thumb, I always say, okay, who's up for the next promotion? You're going to get corresponding author. And that's how we would do it. So I think this was a pivotal experience because it was a pretty miserable 3-year project. Now, everything else was going okay, but that project was not pleasant. And so I just encourage you to have those conversations. And because I learned that actually really early in my career, I learned how to have very good collaborative relationships. And as a result, if you look at my papers, oh gosh, I've never actually counted it, but I'm going to say probably close to over 2/3 are collaborative work, because I found so much joy in it, because we took away the barriers, right? The things you'd argue about. We could enjoy the projects. We could be really fruitful in the work. And so if I always had a choice, I'd always rather collaborate. And that's because of that really difficult experience early on.
Yeah. Good wisdom. Good wisdom. Well, so we've been talking a lot about maybe matters that affect faculty and young faculty members and mid-career faculty members. I want to pivot a little bit to something more directly applicable to students. And so our next question is, what do you think is the appropriate role of an advisor in helping a mentee through a challenge? You could speak to this at any level, undergraduates, graduate students, but yeah, how should the advisor support their mentees?
Well, so I realize at some of your institutions, this answer may not fully apply because more and more institutions have unionized students, postdocs, and so on. So that changes some of the way in which we engage. I have not been at an institution where faculty or students or postdocs are unionized. So I realize some of my comments may make it a little trickier. But I think the biggest trick is that we have to meet students where they are. And some of them will be diamonds in the rough and need a lot more work to help get them where we hope they will be. But it's always worth the investment of time, I think. Some of my most successful and productive and impactful students came from students that needed that extra help. Partially because I'm a big believer in also making available to students sort of that access mission, right? So a lot of the undergrads in my lab were kids that were first gen to college. So then they get to graduate school, they don't know what to do, right? We have to continue to remember that not everybody understands what the path looks like, whether it's at the university, in this country, and business. And so meeting them where they are and giving them the tools to be successful is a big piece. I think as faculty, we have to give them a way to sort of plot their course, like clear goals, metrics, timelines, and sometimes be, really candid and honest and hold them accountable. And when they don't meet those goals and expectations, but also give them the grace to make mistakes and fail and need the extra time. And being patient with them. Remembering that our students and our postdocs, they are people, not employees. And even when they're unionized, that is only to protect them because people abuse students and postdocs for a long time. Those are structures to protect them. But even still within that, they are people, not a proverbial employee. But I do think one of the mistakes that often happens is that we think we can help them with everything. And so one thing I learned from my time in leadership roles is what a incredibly robust infrastructure our institutions have to support students with needs. So if your students have financial need, emotional need, medical needs, that's where our role ends and where we need to help them have access to the professionals on campus that can help them with that. Sometimes that's hard, right? Because we feel so emotionally invested and personally invested, we try to solve their problems. But that's where our job ends. And just want to encourage you to use those resources. I think when I was an associate dean in charge of graduate education, often what came across my desk were problems where faculty sort of tried to solve too much, too far into the personal realm with incredibly good intentions. But I think at some point you have to pass along issues to the professionals beyond your mentoring them on their professional development. And so I think that's the role of advisor, is giving them room to grow and also making sure that you give them opportunities to fail and learn from it, and do it kindly and patiently.
Very well said. I'm remembering now a phrase you used earlier. You said happy students are very productive students, right? And so I really like this emphasis you're placing on putting the people first, making sure they're taken care of in a holistic way, and the rest follows.
Yeah, and candidly, that's exactly what I did as a dean with faculty and staff, right? Happy faculty and staff who feel respected, supported, will do their best work, right?
Yeah.
So it applies even for people further along in their professional journey.
Definitely. Okay, well, so let's move to our last question, and this is kind of a fun one, in my opinion. We've talked a lot about your journey over the arc of your career today. So if you could go back in time and talk to your younger self at any stage of your life and career, you can pick. But is there a key piece of advice that you might give to your younger self with all the wisdom and perspective that you have now?
I think I would go back to my PhD self when I was in that final 6 months, trying to compile the dissertation and get those last little pieces of data. That probably was the most insecure stage of life, because you didn't know where you're going to go next. I would go back to that stage of self and say, don't worry, you will get a job. You're going to get tenure. You're going to find the life partner you're hoping to find. You're going to love your career. You're going to have your family, and just be you, and the rest will come. And that's enough. I wish I could have told myself that and believed myself. I don't know if I would have believed myself, but it would have been nice to hear, because I remember spending a lot of time thinking, well, what do I do if I don't get a faculty job? And then I worried about, well, what would I do if I don't get tenure? One point I figured I'd open a jazz club and call it Shazza's, because in England, the nickname for Sharon is Shaz or Shazzy or Shazza. So that was my backup, a jazz club. Because also in this dream scenario, I would have been able to play the piano, and I would have, but fortunately that never came to pass, because I got the job, I got tenure, and life went
on. You heard it here first, folks. Even someone as successful as Dr. Walker had a backup plan to open a jazz club once upon a time.
Might still do it. Maybe that'll be my retirement gig.
Well, thank you, Sharon, for all your candor and wisdom that you've shared with us through this. And what a delightful kind of lighthearted note to end on. So we have reached the end of our prepared questions, and so we're going to transition into some audience Q&A. I think we've got about 10 minutes left in the webinar. So those of you in the audience who have stuck with us, please feel free to raise your hands in Zoom or put a question in the chat, and we would love to have some open Q&A. I'm going to sign off from the recording, so I'm going to stop recording now and thank everyone for attending the second installment of our AESP Standing on the Shoulders of Giants conversation.
Thank you.
Good morning.